Hello, welcome to the conversation here at News Central Television. This is the program where we bring you all to date with all the political happenings around the continent of Africa. I'm Benga Boroa.
And I'm Rita Mordi. A lot of stories making the rounds on the political scene around the African continent. And take for Tunisia, where the country has granted the president more powers according to the constitution. And right now, on today's edition of The Conversation, we'll be looking at situations in Kenya and, of course, situations in Liberia.
Quite a lot happening politically on the African continent. You and I thought we were done and dusted on Monday, following the announcement of the Kenyan presidential election results. But it looks like we're in it for a long haul. It's going to the courts.
Definitely. And, Raila Odinga is not taking a no for an answer, and he's saying he's going to head to the court. And I think the fact that there's a division between the IEBC commissioners has also given him a bit of backing.
Some grounds to use in court. And elections in Angola next week. So quite a lot is happening. But let's start off our conversation today in Liberia, where 3 Liberian officials named in the United States sanctions have been suspended by Liberian President George Weah. President George Weah views the allegations against the officials contained in the report as grave. He also designated the principal deputies of the suspended officials to act in their stead. The United States announced on Monday that it has imposed corruption sanctions on senior Liberian officials, including one close to President George Weah, the minister in charge of presidential affairs, and President Weah's Secretary General, Nathaniel McGill.
Now, Nathaniel McGill is accused of abusing his position to undermine the integrity and independence of Liberia's democratic institutions for personal gains, according to a statement from State Department spokesman Ned Price. A separate Treasury Department statement said he received bribes in government contracts. 2 other senior officials are also sanctioned: Sayma Syrenius Cephus, who is Liberia's Attorney General, and Twehway, who heads the National Port Authority. Now, joining us live for this conversation, we have publisher GNN Liberia, an online newspaper in Monrovia, Joel Cholo-Brooks. We also have Ibrahim Al-Bakri Nye, fellow at the Center for Democracy and Development, Abuja, and Duker Institute for Social and Economic Research, Monrovia. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on this conversation. So right now we have just Ibrahim Al-Bakri Nye with us for the conversation, but subsequently we'll definitely have Joel Cholo-Brooks join us.
We're also expecting Dr. Clarence Muniba, former government minister in Liberia, to join the conversation.
So we'll start with you, Ibrahim. What do you make of the suspension of the 3 government officials who were sanctioned by the United States for what it said was their ongoing involvement in public corruption?
Hello, Ibrahim. Are you there? Okay, we hope to sort out Ibrahim's connection issues, but interesting developments in Liberia. And you begin to wonder, you know, politicians have a way of reacting when, okay, we have Ibrahim back. Let the experts speak. Hello, Ibrahim. Glad to have you join us.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm here already.
So, Ibrahim, if you can hear us, what do you think of this? Ibrahim, can you hear us? Okay, if you can hear us, we would like your take on this officials who are being, or rather this ongoing involvement in public corruption by President George Weah's officials.
Okay, we've lost Ibrahim. So like I was saying before, if the United States Treasury Department did not sanction these officials, or if they didn't, you know, flag it, would the Liberian government have responded this way? So it seems like the US is doing the work of the Liberian Anti-Corruption Commission.
It might seem so, and to some others, it might also seem that the Liberian President George Weah is trying to remove the eyes from people. I think we have Clarence with us.
Yes, we have Dr. Clarence Muniba as a former government minister, the youngest in the Republic of Liberia. Glad to have you join us, Dr. Muniba.
Thank you very much. Very glad to be here. Obviously, on not the greatest of circumstances, as this, you know, really gives us a black eye as a country. But absolutely glad to join you on and shed some light on this.
Okay, Dr. Muniba, what do you make of this corruption, this scandal that's going on? It was flagged by the United States Treasury Department, and there've been sanctions against them. And now we've seen the Liberian government respond by suspending those involved. What's your take on all of this?
You know, and again, that's a good question. And that's always been a challenge that we've had here in Liberia. It typically, you know, when you look at Liberia, you look at the entire context of what we have. Corruption is always an issue that we talk about as a nation and as a country, but we never really take action on. And so even if you look at the past history of Liberia over the last 30 or 40 years, nobody has really gone to jail for corruption. And so that's why we always ask the question, are we really serious about fighting corruption, or are we just talking about it? And so even in this particular case that we're highlighting right now with the 3 government officials suspended now by the president, you know, and the truth is nothing probably would have happened at all if the United States government wouldn't have intervened and put them on the sanctions list. And that's the issue and challenge that we have. We always wait, and we're very reactive to fighting corruption. We're never proactive. And that's been a challenge for us throughout our history. And it will continue to be a problem if we continue to just wait for others to take action in Liberia.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Clarence. I'd like to bring in Joel Cholo-Brooks right now into the discussions. Now, Clarence mentioned the fact that the government in Liberia has more often been reactive. Now, what do you make of this suspension? Do you think it in good faith that President George Weah is finally putting a tough line on corruption in Liberia? Or do you also feel that he has just been reactive?
Thank you to appear on the program today. You know, Monrovia is the hottest spot today. A lot of people are talking about this issue of the suspension of the 3 officials. But many are calling for their dismissals because they are allegedly involved in high-class corruption. So people are calling for the president to dismiss them instead of suspending them. So that's the issue. That's the issue of the discussion today. If you can remember, my platform reported this, that government officials to be sanctioned because of the corrupt deals. And people took that news to be fake news. But then you won't believe it. When the news came out this week, a lot of people have been calling me, commending me for my publication. And so, I mean, that's it. That's the hottest story in town.
Okay, but Joel, don't you think that proceedings actually follow before dismissal? So a suspension first and then their investigations before dismissal?
Yeah, what they are saying is that, yes, indeed, the president has come out to suspend those officials involved. But what the public are saying is that one of the officials, who is the Minister of State for Presidential Affairs, McGill, has been bragging all around here how, in fact, to steal in Liberia is not bad. Rather to steal in Liberia than to go other country and take the money that was stolen to go and develop other country. So people took serious exception to the minister's statement. So when the thing happened, a lot of people got so angry of the president not dismissing this guy because he's already admitted that, yes, indeed. I mean, it's better to steal than to take the money out of here and go to other countries to develop. So people are still saying the president should have gone beyond that, dismissing them instead of suspending them.
Thank you very much. Joe, I'd like to bring in Ibrahim. Ibrahim, what are the political implications of this suspension, if you look at the political climate in Liberia, and what's the opposition saying about this development?
Well, the political implications are severe and grave for George Weah's political future. The opposition, Unity Party, the Liberty Party have all issued statements calling for actions beyond suspension. They are calling for the dismissal of these officials, but this is beyond the dismissal of officials. This brings to question the functioning of the government, the capacity, independence of the government institutions that are charged with the fight against corruption. So it begs the question of where have they been? These grave allegations. There have been no indictment against Mr. Nathaniel McGill over the last 5 years. There have been no indictment and no accusation against Mr. Syrenius Cephus. Yes, there was an investigation against Mr. Twehway last year, not against him personally, but against officials of the National Port Authority. And his name was mentioned by some of those officials, but there was no attempt by the Anti-Corruption Commission, the General Auditing Commission, all of the national institutions fighting corruption. None of them spotted any of these guys highlighted what they have been accused of doing. And so this brings to the table the question of, where are we running a functioning government? Do we have to be, does the United States have to fight for us? Where have they been that these grave allegations have taken place and none of them have spotted this at any stage? And so it's a question of the credibility of the government and a question of President Weah's own determination to fight corruption moving forward. The suspension for me is cosmetic and doesn't address the broader question of reform and the broader question of strengthening state capacity to address issues of corruption and the lack of service delivery. And so for me at this stage, I want to discuss greater issues of governance reform, building state capacity, than discussing the mundane issue of 3 officials being suspended from the Weah government.
Okay, thank you so much, Ibrahim. I'll take up from where you stopped last now for Dr. Moniba. Now, you talked about the anti-corruption department in Liberia. So, Dr. Moniba, do you feel this is an indictment on the Liberia Anti-Corruption Commission for not actually spotting these ills going on?
That's kind of the challenge that we've always had in this country, and I always say we have very good laws and agencies in this country. We have the foundation to be a strong, transparent, democratic country. The challenge is our implementation and accountability in the country. And so when you do look at the anti-corruption agencies, this is something where, they haven't had success in the past. And this is something where the entire world is looking at us. And so, there has to be something where we have transparent, accountable investigation, where it's free and fair and it's open to the public. So we know exactly that we have to be able to see at some point that corruption has to be prosecuted in this country and not encouraged. And this is an opportunity, even though they haven't delivered in the past, for them to deliver right now for the Liberian people.
Thank you very much. Now, I would like to bring in Joe. Joe, one of the government officials suspended is President Weah's Chief of Staff, Nathaniel McGill. President's Chief of Staff is in his inner circle of the government. He's very close to the government. My question is, are they sacred cows in Liberia's anti-corruption war? And what are the chances that this, we've said it before, if it wasn't for the United States, what are the chances that they'll be indicted? And like one of the panelists said, it's quite cosmetic. So do you think such a high level of graft will go on without the president's knowledge, or the anti-corruption agency commission is just looking the other way because they're a few sacred cows when it comes to politics in Liberia?
Well, as you may be aware, Minister McGill is the head of the president's office, the chief of staff of the president to the president. And then he has, everyone is saying, McGill, whatsoever he did, the president should be in the know because he's very close to the president. In fact, he goes around and making promises on behalf of the government, making pledges. Like the most recent one is the amount of $15 million, Liberian dollars, to one county. And people started to question as to where Mr. McGill got such amount from the pledge to the people of one county. So everything that took place, people are saying Mr. President should be aware because he's McGill, he and McGill, they are very close friends. Another thing is that the issue of the minister not going out there to making sure that things work right. The president himself is aware, according to information received, that the issue of this is not like imposing sanction on her own person. This sanction has been imposed internationally. It's the U.S. government imposing sanction. I heard people talking in other quarters that McGill should be investigated locally. No, he cannot be investigated locally. The sanction was imposed by the American government because of what it got involved in. So that's the issue. People are saying Minister McGill must be dismissed and face the full weight of the law for misapplying the money of the people's money. So, that's the issue here.
All right, Ibrahim, I'll go back to you now. You talk about governance reforms when looking at the issue of corruption going on in Liberia and how much sanctions will not go a long way. Now, what sort of governance reforms do you think should be done in Liberia?
Well, governance reform in terms of institutional capacity building, we've already have the foundational institutions. There are elaborate laws, but the political culture doesn't support these laws. And so we need now to move into a new political culture with the necessary institutional arrangements. The Anti-Corruption Commission needs budgetary support, and it needs a process of recruitment that is independent and transparent so that its commissioners and staff are removed and disconnected from the political process, and so that they can project themselves and work more independently to investigate and support these things long before international actors like the US and other partners can support them. That's the kind of reform we are talking about, reforms that are rooted in the national culture and that address the immediate problems of the country, particularly corruption, abuse of power, and the lack of service delivery, accountability. That's the kind of governance reform we need. At the moment, we have so many institutions that are built putatively to respond to these things, but they do not have the capacity in terms of resources and the authority in terms of autonomy and independence to project themselves most forcefully and deliver on the expected mandate for which they were created.
Now, Dr. Ibrahim, do you think it's deliberate that these government institutions, lack the support and the funding to go against corruption, or is it deliberate?
To some extent, it is deliberate because the same political actors that enact them into law are the same political actors that undermine them in their function, in the discharge of their function. And so it is deliberate. Most of the time, you have to keep them incapacitated. You have to keep them toothless to be able to carry out some of the corruption and criminal activities that take place within the Liberian government.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. I'd like to bring in Dr. Maniba. Now, Dr. Maniba, the United States Treasury Department said Bill Twehway, the managing director of the National Ports Authority, orchestrated the diversion of $1.5 million in vessel storage fees funds from the National Ports Authority into a private account and from the private company to which he later unilaterally awarded a contract for loading and unloading cargo at Port of Buchanan. I mean, these are very serious allegations here. Do you believe that, he can do all of this without the knowledge of the president? And what do you make of all of this? Because it's corruption on a grand scale.
No, it really is, and unfortunately, I think these are allegations that, if proven true, it is possible that you can't do it without the knowledge of the president because he runs an autonomous agency. But this is where, again, when we look at the policies of this administration and even past administrations, this is where we have to be very clear in terms of how we want to go forward. And this, there has to be a time in our nation's history where we say enough is enough. And this is that time right now. These are allegations that have been, founded by the United States government. I'm assuming and I'm hoping they're going to share with our anti-government agencies. And so where everyone who's indicted here must be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Because again, there's a lot of corruption in the country. I can't sit here and say the president knows of everything. But I can say that the president now has the opportunity and the responsibility to act on what has been found and instruct our anti-corruption agencies to do a full investigation, which I hope will be transparent and open to the Liberian people. Because again, enough is enough if we really want to develop our country.
Okay, Dr. Mondiba, I would like to stay with you. Now, looking at all the past administrations and looking at George Weah's administration, how badly would you say corruption has affected the Liberian society?
Oh, I mean, listen, we still, up until today, a lot of people in this country live, like it's 1922 or 1822. A lot of, like the poverty in this country is extremely high. So poverty, outside of policies, poverty has to be looked at as the number one reason why we're struggling in the country in terms of development, in terms of agriculture, in terms of education and healthcare. I always say that in Liberia, because corruption has been rampant, throughout our history, unfortunately, it's, Liberians are actually dying because there's no money to buy, to build hospitals, train doctors, or buy medications and drugs for our citizens. So it's extremely rampant in our country, and we must have an opportunity at this point forward. This is public knowledge now. Now, it's almost been like, yeah, there's corruption, but there's nothing done about it. It's high time now that the government starts to do something about it. So again, I continue to call not only for a full investigation on people in this administration, but I served the previous administration as well. I'm calling for that, the U.S., the World Bank, the IMF, everybody else who works with the Liberian government to open investigations on everyone, not only in this administration, but the previous administrations as well. There has to be a time, like I said, enough is enough. And this, I hope, will be the changing of the guard in Liberia, where we start to prosecute people who are guilty of corruption.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muniba. Ibrahim, Dr. Muniba says there has to be consequences for corruption, and that brings me to this question. The National Civil Society Council of Liberia, in a statement issued yesterday through its national chairperson, Loretta Alathea Pokai, called on President Weah to take some concrete steps beyond the suspension to save the image of the government from embarrassment and ensure public trust by dismissing, prosecuting, and confiscating of ill-acquired properties or wealth, barring of said official from participating in political affairs and governance of the state. Quite a long and extensive list of what to do. But does the government of President Weah have the political will to do some of these things? And what will be the proper way of going about ensuring that, look, it's not just these three examples? How do we make sure that corruption is not institutionalized in Liberia?
Well, George Weah has to muster the courage and the political will to do exactly what the population is calling for, what the people are calling for: accountability and consequences. The reason why corruption fester in Liberia is because there are no consequences for people who abuse power. And we went through a civil war, and after the civil war, individuals that were accused of gross human rights violation, accused of rape, accused of atrocities and mass killings, are still moving around with impunity. And that emboldens others to continue to be corrupt, to continue to violate human rights. And so, as Clarence Moniba has said, this is the moment for accountability. This is the moment for an end to impunity. We have to rise to this moment, and George Weah has to work closely now with the United States to support his effort at stemming corruption. He said during his inauguration that he was elected on the mandate to end corruption in Liberia. And if he hasn't ended corruption, now he has the opportunity to work with the US government and to work with all international partners to build the capacity of the investigating agencies, the Liberian National Police Anti-Corruption Commission, to salvage the image of the Republic and save resources to support education, to support healthcare, and to support poverty reduction programs. And I think it can be done. He must do this. And to do this, he has to be transparent in his decision making. And as the US ambassador called on him, and we all, everything that the US ambassador said at his press conference are things that have been said over and over by ordinary Liberians, that he must make good decisions. He must appoint competent people to government. He must appoint people with record of integrity and probity to government. And he must ensure that they are all accountable and respectful of the rule of law. These are simple things to do. Yes. And the laws are there. The laws are clear. Our country, our people have suffered enough from corruption. We still live in primitive conditions. Hospitals are absent in far-flung rural areas. Women are struggling and dying in hospitals to give birth because of the lack of medication and because of the lack of simple things like hospital gloves. And so this is the moment, and he must rise to this moment and live up to his pledge of ending corruption.
Okay, Dr. Modiba, you heard from Ibrahim there. He said that George Weah was elected to end this long change of corruption going on in Liberia. Now, with this corruption scandals in President Weah's government have any bearing on his second-term bid and the outcome of the 2023 general elections?
Whether it will have an impact on the 2023 elections, I'm sorry, you broke up.
Yeah. Okay, I said, will this corruption scandals going on in his administration, will it have an effect on his second bid?
Absolutely, absolutely. And if it doesn't, then we have to question ourselves as Liberian citizens to see if we really want change in this country. Again, corruption throughout our history has gone with impunity. And again, but people are actually rewarded a lot of times in Liberia's history because of corrupt acts and practices, because they're the ones who have the liquidity, they're the ones who have the cash. So when we start to go into the 2023 cycle, it's going to be very key to understand, kind of the feeling, the temperature of the Liberian people. And I'm assuming, and I've had multiple discussions over the last couple of days, whereas, what's going to be the next step? What's going to be the reaction of the Liberian people? And I don't think it's going to be favorable to the current government.
And what has the opposition said about this?
Once again, it's the typical, and this is where now we as Liberians have to be tired of the typical. In the sense that, opposition parties and opposition leaders have come out and spoken out against it, and called for prosecution. But the thing is, normally in Liberia, everything that happens has a 24 to 48-hour cycle, and it's actually a joke in this country, in the sense that what would happen, it would take over the news for a day or two, and then it would die down, to the point where a lot of corrupt officials throughout the history of our government, they'll be accused for corruption, they'll be suspended, maybe moved to a different administration or ministry, and then nothing happens, no prosecutions. So this is where, again, we have to really be keen on what happens going forward with these government officials in terms of prosecution, investigation, and possible prosecution, and then also what will happen in 2023.
Now, finally, before I let you go,
same thing. It's going to be very key, and I think it's going to have an impact on the 2023 race.
Now, finally, Ibrahim, we heard from Dr. Maniba there, how, it's not just Liberia, in Nigeria too, you could say the same thing about, people moving on and just going about their daily lives in order to fend for themselves, and they really don't stay on issues, and that's why there's almost a culture of impunity. My final question is this, what are some of the real-life effects? Because some people feel corruption is a victimless crime, and it's our turn to eat. It's the person in power that has the opportunity and the blessings. So, what are some of the real life consequences of unimpeded corruption in the country?
Well, it is clear, and Liberia demonstrates the case
right?
of what corruption does to a country. It undermines the capacity of the state to deliver basic services. In Liberia, about 60% of school-going children, students, are in private schools. This is because the government schools are undercapacitated. They do not have the resources. They do not have the qualified teachers. And the private schools as well are expensive. And in most rural communities, I told you before, most rural communities, there are no hospitals, health facilities are under-resourced, they are absent, health workers are not paid on time, and they are severely underpaid. And so the consequences are clear. We've seen an increase in the rate of maternal mortality in Liberia the last few years. And this is because the hospitals are under-resourced to respond to the challenges. And we've seen the number of young people dropping out of formal education in this country. And this is because the lack of investment in youth development programs in the country. And so the real life consequences are clear. It undermines the capacity of the state. And Liberia represents the most glaring example of a state being held down in poverty and in miserable conditions because of corruption.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. This is where we drop the anchor on this part of the conversation. I'd like to say a big thank you to George Cholo Brooks, publisher, JNN Liberia, an online newspaper in Monrovia. I'd also like to say thank you to Dr. Ibrahim Bakari Inye, a fellow at the Center for Democracy and Development in Abuja and Duco Institute of Social and Economic Research in Monrovia. And finally, Dr. Clarence Maniba. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being a part of the conversation and sharing your insights with us. Thanks for your time and contribution.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You're watching the conversation here on News Central Television. We just concluded our conversation on Liberia, where the United States Treasury Department has imposed sanctions on 3 government officials in Liberia. We looked at the consequences. It's now time for us to switch gears to Kenya, where presidential candidate Raila Odinga has rejected the result of the just concluded Kenyan elections. We'll look at the implications of this and more when we return from the break. It's a conversation. Do stay with us.